people who were in charge in those days were honorable men operating under the best safety precautions available in those days.
They had to expose people to these dangers. They had to sacrifice some of the people of the western United States.
Sincerely feel the government knew what they were doing. Or else why did they wait till it came this way where there wasn't as much population? Why did they have them wash these cars?
I know of no instance where the commission ever did anything that was in any way against good, sound public health protection.
And he leaned over to me and said, "Look, we've had people try to interfere with the AEC before. We got them and we'll get you."
Are there indications that people were exposed to way too much radiation?
No, not at all.
Because he was bleeding from everywhere. His head, his eyes, his nose, his ears, and the man wanted help.
When you come out with your findings, how can we believe what you're saying?
You'll just have to take my word for it.
To fall behind any other nation in atomic progress is a national risk. To assure our defense, we have to keep our atomic strength at top level by testing new ideas and principles and applying these principles in weapons. That's why we have the Nevada test site.
The battlefield of the future, if it exists, may well be an atomic battlefield. That brutal fact has forced upon the Army the absolute necessity of testing both men and technical concepts under atomic conditions. Control of the land was indispensable to victory in the time of America's Revolutionary War. It will be indispensable on the atomic battlefield that tomorrow may force upon us. It is the obligation of the Army to be prepared to seize and keep that control, despite changes in warfare, weapons, and techniques, however spectacular. Now this is Sergeant Stuart Queen, inviting you to be with us again next week for another look at your Army in action on The Big Picture.
The Big Picture is an official television report for the armed forces and the American people.
They call this piece of earth Ground Zero. This was the place the United States scorched the sky and scared the hell out of the communists with the most awful weapon known to man. We are at the nuclear test site in Nevada. It was chosen to test atom bombs because it is a desolate, God-forsaken area, expendable. It was also desirable because from here the winds blew in a northeasterly direction over southern Utah with little population. And so if there were any radioactive fallout, it would fall out where it would do the least damage.
If you were driving from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City on U.S. Highway 91, you'd pass through St. George, Utah, population 4,562. It's pre-dawn, 5 in the morning. Everything is closed down. Everyone's asleep. Everyone, that is, except a milkman. Been delivering over the same route for 12 years. Never missed a day. And another night owl. Keeps his place open 24 hours for tourists coming through. Since the rest of the town was sound asleep, only our night owl saw it. That great flash in the western sky. An atomic bomb at the Nevada test site 140 miles to the west. But it's old stuff to St. George. Routine. They've seen a lot of them ever since 1951. Nothing to get excited about anymore.
Southern Utah has always been a very conservative area, and in the 1950s, during the Cold War, the people of Southern Utah took great pride in the atomic testing here. Now, for the first time in their lives, they're starting to question. They are saying, how could our government do this to us?
How come there are so many from Southern Utah with cancer and leukemia?
We lost our oldest daughter. She was born in '52. We lost her at 6 with leukemia.
Well, I think that they got no damn business of shooting them off down there. That's myself. It's too damn many towns and areas too close to it. That's mine.
Why'd you move away?
Oh, hell, I like it right here.
Well, no, I've lost an uncle. I've lost a grandfather, both with leukemia. I've lost, he would be a cousin to me with cancer.
I think it's taken a lot of the joy out of our lives. We're so close that we're feeling each other's sorrows, and all it has made us very frightened, sometimes terrorized when the word cancer is mentioned.
Are you surprised at what you found?
Shocked, astonished. When we first started just writing down names, we thought that we would just, do it to see just how many people that we thought there were that might have died with cancer. And as the thing grew and grew and grew, we became more nervous and more shocked and had no idea. And now as it's growing more, it's a frightening thing.
August 1957, the Army shipped in soldiers, put them in foxholes several miles away to witness what they called the Smoky Blast. 21 years later, the government has finally admitted that radiation from Smoky may have caused cancer. The soldier who prompted the investigation died of cancer during the congressional hearings. Sandy Gilmore was the first reporter in the country to tell the Paul Cooper story.
On this one particular bomb that we participated in, and we was approximately 3,000 yards from ground zero. We was originally supposed to be in trenches 3,000 yards from ground zero when it detonated.
I first met Paul Cooper early March 1977. He told me his story from his bed in the VA hospital in Salt Lake, where he was dying of leukemia.
They had us turn our backs towards the blast before they detonated us and told us to hold our hands over our eyes, which we did. As the bomb detonated, we could see every bone in our hands through our closed eyelids, just like an extra large X-ray.
Cooper told a chilling story with national implications. If Cooper in fact got leukemia because he witnessed a 44-kiloton atomic explosion back in 1957, then it was entirely possible others had as well.
What seems to be the trouble, soldier? You look a little bit worried.
Well, I am, Chaplain. Just a little bit.
Actually, there's no need to be worried, as the Army has taken all of the necessary precautions to see that we're perfectly safe here.
Sir, have you ever been out on one of these shots before?
Yes, I've had the opportunity to see a number of the atomic tests. I feel that as a chaplain, it is my responsibility to be with my men.
What's it like, Chaplain?
First of all, one sees a very, very bright light, followed by a shock wave, and then you hear the sound of the blast, and then it seems as though there's a minor earthquake. And then you look up and you see the fireball as it ascends up into the heavens. It contains all of the rich colors of the rainbow, and then as it rises up into the atmosphere, it turns a beautiful pale yellow, and then assembles into the mushroom. It's a wonderful sight to behold.
It was possible the soldiers were guinea pigs, victims of atomic age experimentation. It was possible the national safety standard for radiation exposure was actually unsafe. Cooper clearly was opening a Pandora's box from which might emerge unimaginable horrors and secrets of government indifference.
How are you doing now, Paul? Since we last talked to you 3 weeks ago, what are your...
The old doctor says not so good right now. But they got me on another chemotherapy treatment, so remains to be seen. That's why everybody's wearing masks today. They're trying to protect me. Counts are down so low. So we really won't know for a couple of weeks yet. Well, one of these days it's going to happen to you. So. Except right now, I know it's happening 25 years ahead of time for me, at least. But when I put the claim in for service-connected disability, the doctors, myself, and the Atomic Energy Commission told us it could not have happened. It kind of makes me mad. Because, by gosh, it did happen the way I stated. And I hold the Atomic Energy Commission to blame for it.
The Veterans Administration changed its mind and authorized 100% disability, the same as if Cooper had been disabled or killed in combat.
Now, they can shove one man aside, and then maybe pass a buck, whatnot, but when you start finding quite a few people have the same thing, then there's something wrong there. I think the Atomic Energy Commission just done a lot of things they shouldn't have done. Now they're trying to cover up.
A congressional investigation of GIs who had seen atomic blasts was ordered for early 1978. Nearly a year had passed since my first interview with the former Army sergeant. By now, Cooper was near death in the Boise, Idaho VA hospital near his hometown. Well, this has come a long way since our first interview.
Oh, yes.
in early March.
Sure has. Yeah.
Do you think that the Pentagon, the military, the AEC, you think they've covered this up over the years?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's a matter of time, and we'll know for sure.
We'll know what for sure?
That the radiation and the deaths has been caused together. That they're one and the same.
Of Paul Cooper, it can be said, here was a gentle man who, facing death, made an entire nation look closer at the lingering effects of the atomic era.
It's killing me. That's what it's doing to me. And nobody's going to tell me any different.
This man, Jim O'Connor, is another soldier who was there to see the bombs go off. Now he is suffering from cancerous skin lesions, his hair and teeth are falling out, his muscles are falling apart.
There's just nobody that's going to tell me that radiation did not do this to me.
O'Connor, Paul Cooper, and other veterans have charged that the government did not prepare the soldiers, did not warn them, and did not protect them.
We never knew where the bomb was going to be until the tower was built. We never knew the bomb went off at a certain place unless we happened to run up on a slab of cement, or if we had identified the area before that. We ran that desert. We were everywhere in that desert.
O'Connor believes at least one soldier died within hours of a blast. If he is right, the soldier, among others, was only 2,500 yards from ground zero.
I headed down there maybe 20 minutes after the shot. I got halfway there, my feet were burning about the ground. I just can't tell you how hot the ground was. My feet were burning. I couldn't go back, I couldn't go forward. I went ahead, and before I knew it, I was standing between the bunker, which is northeast, and the camera. Now, this camera wasn't taking pictures of anything else but this bunker, this one bunker.
And what was in the bunker?
I can tell you the smell. The smell is the same smell as what I smell in Korea. This is how they dispose of their bodies. They throw them in cans and burn them up. But behind the bunker, one had managed somehow to either get out. He was burnt. Wait
a minute, you mean a man?
A man, a human being, a man, yes. He had gotten out of the bunker somehow before the blast. It had to be before the blast. He had crawled behind the bunker. And because of the concussion, this man, I'm saying because of the concussion is because he was bleeding from everywhere. His head, his eyes, his nose, his ears, and the man wanted help. He was trying to get up. He was in just no shape. That close. I just can't. And nobody's going to intimidate the fact that I saw what I saw. I know I saw it.
I've looked at the radiation safety plans on these tests myself. I know that the soldiers would never send into an area without having a radiation safety team precede them into the area.
Colonel Bill McGee with the Defense Nuclear Agency.
That individual units, very small units, squads or platoons perhaps, might have disregarded the plan or the order. I don't know of any of these instances, but it's conceivable because you've got people involved. We're talking 80,000 people here at the Nevada test site, you know.
Colonel McGee, as far as I'm concerned, is another colonel of the urinal. He is put in there to say what the Pentagon wants to say.
Is there any way you could be mistaken?
No, there's no way I could be mistaken. No, sir. I know what I saw. Was Colonel McGee there?
O'Connor has had a difficult time convincing the government that he was ever stationed at the Nevada test site.
Tell me a little bit about your military records, because you have
I
sort
have
of
528 pages. And this goes all the way through my basic training to Korea, 16 months in Korea, to Fort Huachuca, and all of a sudden from Fort Huachuca it goes to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. Missing out of it is 4 months from December or February to May. are missing.
January 1978, a Major Alan Skirker testified before a congressional subcommittee that the government knows of at least 123 soldiers who were considerably overexposed to radioactive fallout, although the records of these men are missing. Major Skirker also testified that 6 veterans who were with the ground forces at the Smoky test site have leukemia, and that this number is uncomfortably high.
It's ruined my life. It's a hell of a price that people have to pay to have me sit around and absorb their money for a goddamn disease that the government gave me, just for their ignorance. I am a victim of, like thousands of other veterans, like thousands of civilian people, of the government's ignorance and now of their attitude protecting their power, their turf, and their asses, and that's the way it stands right now.
Carl Eidsvåg was the first television reporter to pursue the possibility that radiation from atomic testing here in Nevada might cause cancer. His first efforts all met with the same response, that the Atomic Energy Commission had taken adequate safety precautions. Finally, one scientist agreed to talk, and then another, and another. And these are all reputable scientists, many of whom had worked with the AEC. And they are all saying the same thing.
One explanation we continually run into from the Department of Energy is that during the 1950s and 60s, the best possible precautions were being taken. Everyone thought it was safe. In other words, the Atomic Energy Commission was doing everything it thought necessary to protect the people. But two-time Nobel Prize winner Dr. Linus Pauling calls that explanation utter nonsense. He says even by the mid-50s, a great deal was known about the harmful effects of radiation, and says he and several other scientists tried to warn the government about the possible dangers of open-air nuclear testing.
Well, I'm sure that the Atomic Energy Commission was aware of these dangers in the late 50s. They knew what I was saying and what other workers in the field, such as Dr. K.Z. Morgan, were saying at the same time. And they can't have failed to know that this was a situation.
So even by the late 1950s, they knew there would be dangers?
Oh, yes. Of course they did. This was known before the atomic energy program was set up in 1942. They knew that people would die.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this program to bring you important news. Word has just been received from the Atomic Energy Commission that due to a change in wind direction, the residue from this morning's atomic detonation is drifting in the direction of St. George. It is suggested that everyone remain indoors for 1 hour or until further notice. There is no danger.
And there was one particular day when one cloud stayed over town all day long, and we weren't told to stay out of it.
And when they told us that there was possibility of fallout and radioactivity, that became quite a household word after we found out what it's all about.
If there were any possibility that that wind was going to blow toward Las Vegas or toward Los Angeles, those shots were canceled. If it was safe for St. George, if it was safe for Utah, it surely should have been safe for Los Angeles. The program meant everything, the health consequences. Well, it's, some people think everyone takes human life seriously. But a lot of people have the attitude humans are expendable. We have too many of them, and they're willing to sacrifice a few.
Dr. John Goffman says what the Energy Commission did to the American people represents one of the major crimes of the century. Goffman spent much of his professional life working for the Atomic Energy Commission, and from 1963 to 69 was assigned by the AEC to investigate the health effects of radiation. Goffman says the agency's attitude toward public health and safety is a national disgrace.
They hoped they weren't going to hurt too many people with what they did on a health basis. But there is no doubt that they would always find rationalizations to allow them to go ahead with their weapons program and other programs, even at the cost of health. And they learned how to turn their heads away from evidence that might suggest that it was not healthy.
One explanation we continually get is that the Atomic Energy Commission did as good a job as it could at the time with what was known. Do you think that's true?
That's not true for several reasons. What was known from the human evidence from 1900 was that cancer and leukemia were produced by radiation. We had extensive animal data by then, and the most telling thing of all was the fact that extreme care was exercised by the Atomic Energy Commission not to fire any shots in Nevada if the wind were blowing toward Las Vegas or Los Angeles. The idea was, let it blow over Utah or let it blow over anywhere east, but keep it from blowing over Las Vegas or over Los Angeles.
Some of the tiny radioactive particles settle back to Earth as the wind disperses the cloud. These particles are called fallout. The bulk of the particles soon fall out and the cloud disappears. An invisible remnant of radioactive material is lifted high, wide, and far by the winds, eventually settling to Earth. But radioactive fallout beyond several miles from the test site has not been known to be serious.
What the Atomic Energy Commission was saying in its public relations film simply was not true. Radioactive fallout is not an isolated problem, and the AEC knew it. Throughout the 1950s, Dr. Linus Pauling was warning everyone that radioactive fallout is a worldwide health hazard.
I made that assumption when I made my calculations, which showed that the bomb test radioactivity, the radioactive fallout and carbon-14 spread over the world, this is back in 1958 to 1962, that this bomb test radioactivity from a single H-bomb exploded in the atmosphere or on the surface of the Earth would result in ultimately in the birth of 500,000 children with gross physical or mental defects somewhere in the world. And in future generations, only a fraction of them, 5 or 10% in the first generation, and the same number of cases of cancer. So the carbon-14 from the bomb tests will continue to cause defective children to be born and people to die of cancer 5,000 years from now.
5,000 years of deadly effects from the bomb tests? The Atomic Energy Commission said Pauling's calculations were ludicrous, but the agency soon had to eat its words. During the Kennedy administration, the government compiled a report on the health effects of radiation. Pauling's work became the basis for part of that report, in which the government had to admit that Pauling was right and that people would die from radiation. Within months, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to conduct all future nuclear tests underground to prevent the spread of radioactive fallout. Dr. Pauling is only one of several scientists who told us the Atomic Energy Commission knew that radioactive fallout would cause cancers. Dr. Harold Knapp, Dr. Robert Pendleton, Dr. Thomas Mancuso, and Dr. Carl Morgan all say the same thing, that the Atomic Energy Commission knowingly disregarded the public's health. Dr. Morgan spent 30 years with the Atomic Energy Commission, most of it investigating the health effects of radiation.
People were encouraged to stay in the house, to not play out in the grass. There was some concern at times about increased levels of iodine and strontium and cesium in the milk. And they and the Federal Radiation Council, which was in existence then, were looking hourly at the data to decide whether to blow the whistle and to warn people to take more stringent measures, or perhaps to desist from using the milk or the lettuce and cabbage and beans. But it got to the verge of the point where they would take some action, but they did not take such action to my knowledge.
Radioactive fallout affects anything that lives, and as Dr. Robert Pendleton observed, man sometimes gets the worst of it. Pendleton is the director of the Radiological Health Department at the University of Utah, and in the late 50s and 60s he was investigating fallout. He found the concentration of certain radioactive isotopes increases as the particles progress through the food chain. So by the time children drink contaminated milk from contaminated cows, which had grazed on contaminated pastures, the children could get a staggering dose of radiation, a dose that could easily cause thyroid cancer. And that's precisely what Pendleton found, that children were receiving massive doses of radiation.
When a child gets as much radiation in one 50-minute day period as he would be permitted in a 30-year period, that is not an insignificant quantity of radiation.
And that was happening in Utah?
It happened, yes.
It's not only cows then, it's people who eat lettuce grown in gardens. I just sort of shudder to think what might be there.
In 1962, Dr. Harold Knapp was working for the Atomic Energy Commission and was also investigating how radiation might affect cow's milk. He discovered the fallout was much worse than anyone expected.
And my calculations for the areas around the test site within a few hundred miles, say in communities like St. George or Caliente or places of that sort, indicated that the doses to the thyroids of children there might have been in the ranges of hundreds of rads to the thyroid. And this was 100 times, perhaps, greater than any dose to any organ that anybody had ever anticipated from fallout before.
You don't wait for an epidemic to diagnose a problem.
Dr. Thomas Mancuso, an eminent professor and researcher at the University of Pittsburgh, has spent the last 15 years investigating the effects of radiation.
There's a real tragedy in that state. Why did they have to wait for a virtual epidemic to occur before they moved to any action?
Even now, the department is saying that back in the 50s and 60s, we did the best we could with what we knew.
Well, I think that's a misused statement, and it's a way out. I don't accept that statement at all. There was enough known about radiation. Everyone likes to say that there's been more research work done on radiation than any other industrial carcinogen. Well, let them live with that statement. They had done so much work with animal experiments and with inhalation. They knew also from animal experiments what would be happening. They didn't have to wait just for the human data.
Why would the Atomic Energy Commission continue to maintain that there is nothing to worry about?
Well, I think that you have, or they had, a practical problem. They wanted to carry out more bomb tests. It's much cheaper to carry them out on the surface of the Earth or close to the surface of the Earth or in the atmosphere than to dig deep enough holes to contain them. If they wanted to carry them out and to save money at the same time, then they had to expose people to these dangers. They had to sacrifice some of the people of the western United States who have been caused to die because of the local radioactive fallout.
But they were saying that it's safe.
Yes. Well, it isn't any secret that you can't believe what governments say or what spokesmen for governments say. We have plenty of examples of this. The fallout matter isn't the only one.
Although the Atomic Energy Commission has continued to defend, even applaud its safety policies, high-level scientists working with the agency became concerned with some of their findings, and when they expressed doubts, they were told to get with the program or get out of the program.
Even the men in the AEC who draw their salaries from AEC and may be quiet don't respect the AEC.
Their papers have been censored.
They tried to suppress information.
There was a lot of foot dragging and downright skullduggery.
They have a conflict of interest, and no matter which way they dress it up and no matter which way they color it, they have already demonstrated an interference in an independent contractor.
When we first heard charges of a government cover-up, we called the Department of Energy to check it out, and officials at the Nevada test site and in Washington told us nothing could be further from the truth.
I think that in almost every case, if it was something that needed to be made public, they made it public.
But as we talked to one scientist after another, they all gave us the same advice. They said, don't believe what the government says.
I wouldn't believe a thing that came out of the Department of Energy concerning health matters at all. I would say their credibility to me is zero, less than zero.
In 1969, Dr. John Goffman discovered radioactivity was 20 times more dangerous than previously expected. In the eyes of science, an extremely important discovery. But in the eyes of the Atomic Energy Commission, even though it was one of its own scientists who had done the work, it was something that had to be kept secret.
It wasn't more than about 10 days then the AEC began to insult us, to ridicule our work, to say that we're off by a factor of 10,000. It was amazing to find this ridicule coming 2 weeks after we made this presentation, yet for 7 years I had prepared the budget to the AEC to receive $3 to $3.5 million a year in research funds. It's strange how
So
for
you
7
have been
years,
respected by the agency.
for 7 years I was totally competent, and in 10 days when I found that radiation was 20 times as harmful as people had thought, I became suddenly incompetent and a fool.
Was there ever any evidence of people within the department basically trying to get you?
Well, there was one member of the AEC who even asked a member of the Public Health Service to help get Goffman and Tamplin, and he said he asked the man why. In essence, the man said, look, I don't care whether Goffman and Tamplin are right about the number of people who are going to get cancer or leukemia from radiation. Right now, we need the nuclear power program. By the time those people get cancer or leukemia, you'll be retired and I'll be retired, so why don't you help us get Goffman and Tamplin now?
The very people within the agency who were in charge, who were responsible for protecting the public's health and safety, tried to suppress the report. Goffman says the nuclear power at all costs attitude was characteristic of the agency and also characteristic of many congressmen.
We were ushered in, and we'd no sooner sat down than Chet Hollifield, chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, Craig Hosmer, and Representative Melvin Price came in. And Chet Hollifield launched a tirade against Tamplin and me. And one of his staff people said, but Mr. Hollifield, these are some of our own scientists from an AEC lab. They're very respected scientists. He says, I don't give a damn who they are. They're interfering with our program. And he leaned over to me and said, look, we've had people try to interfere with the AEC before. We got them and we'll get you.
What is clear, what's absolutely certain and clear, is that first the Atomic Energy Commission and then IRDA have always suppressed reports which weren't favorable to their viewpoint, made by their own people.
Paul Jacobs was possibly the first journalist to seriously question the Atomic Energy Commission. Jacobs started investigating the AEC in 1957, and it was later that same year he published an article that said radioactive fallout was causing an increased number of leukemias in Nevada and southern Utah.
The crux of the matter was that in 1957, they classified a public health service document. Why did they do that? I mean, if there wasn't something wrong. I mean,
and that public health service document
said that the Atomic Energy Commission had failed miserably to monitor the effects of radiation on the people of southern Utah and Nevada. And it also said, and this was the most damning part, which was later taken out of the document, it also said that the people who lived there should be monitored for the rest of their lives. Now, that's never been done.
It urged that the people be monitored.
Yes.
But that's not in the official report.
Yes, that's in the official report. That's in the report that the report that I got.
In 1957?
In 1957.
What about the later report when it was declassified?
When it was declassified and they gave it to me in 1971, they had taken that out.
Did you ask them why?
Yes.
What did they say?
They had no explanation. They said it was a kind of a dumb thing to have done.
Jacobs never let go of the radiation leukemia government cover-up controversy, and it was a story that may have killed him. In July of '77, Jacobs found out that he had cancer. Both he and his doctors thought the cancer may have been caused by radiation he was exposed to in southern Utah. In January of '78, Paul Jacobs died. He died convinced that it was the radiation that had killed him, and he died convinced the government was still hiding information. There now seems to be little doubt of that. Dr. Robert Pendleton, Dr. John Goffman, Dr. Arthur Tamplin, Dr. Alice Stewart, Dr. Carl Morgan, Dr. Thomas Mancuso, and Dr. Harold Knapp all tell their own version of the very same story, that the government tried to suppress vital information. Well, what was the reaction by the agency when you gave them the information?
The first reaction I think I could correctly characterize as stunned silence, then horror, as to what in the world do we do about this. And then the first official reaction I got was a short, terse memorandum from the director of the Division of Biology and Medicine telling me that my work was inadequate, amateurish, not very good at all. And in short, it was a fairly devastating memorandum. I didn't know what in the world to make of it, except I recall thinking, but, you know, he's off his rocker. He can't say this. I mean, I have all the calculations and so forth.
In the case, for example, of Harold Knapp in 1963, finding that the doses in Utah were much higher than had been admitted by the AEC, I was actually appointed to a committee by Dr. Dunham in charge of biology and medicine to see what this committee could do to prevent Dr. Knapp from publishing his findings because, said Dr. Dunham, our credibility will be shot if it turns out that we've been lying about the dose.
Dr. Robert Pendleton, who spent years investigating radioactive fallout for the AEC, ran into a lot more than suppression when he criticized the agency. They tell you basically to be quiet?
Essentially. But they threaten even worse than that. You see, where you personally are involved, you can be courageous.
Well, you were an outspoken critic for a number of years, and then suddenly you became rather silent. Why did you...
as a result of the first big shock of being told that if I didn't get out of the business of criticizing, a very large research facility, about 100 or more people, would be folded up.
Do the same attitudes exist today? Is the cover-up continuing? The Department of Energy says no, but there are strong indications the answer is yes.
The very fact that they did not continue my project after they knew I had positive findings was positive proof enough that they were really not interested in the scientific truth, and they were only interested in getting the information in the hands in which they felt might be more, well, shall we say, more amenable to their interest. They may not.
Dr. Thomas Mancuso says the cover-up is going on now. He says that in 1977, the Department of Energy took away a $1 million radiation study he'd been working on for 10 years because it would show once again that the department was wrong about the dangers of radiation. Official documents obtained under a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit show the agency never expected Mancuso to find anything, and that the agency had planned to use such negative results to deny claims brought forth by radiation victims. But Mancuso did find something. His studies showed more conclusively than ever that low-level radiation does cause cancer. Even though he was working for the Department of Energy, the agency immediately circulated reports throughout the scientific community to try to downplay and discredit the findings. That was in 1977.
blast that I was in was really exciting, and I was a young guy, and I was all for it. I thought it was really going to be a big event in my life, and it was. I'll never forget it, but I never had any idea in the world that the repercussions would still be 25 years after, people wondering what effects it had.
I was like a lot of other people. I felt like the government wouldn't willfully go out and do that to us. But after I've heard of so much on that same order that's gone on, I'm more willing to think that there's not a whole lot of concern for us.
We were sleeping in this room right here on this corner. And when the light come on, when the bomb went off, it was just a brilliant flare. Like somebody turned on a bright light or spotlight or something else on us. And it woke us up. And we laid there wondering what had taken place. And it was only a few minutes, I don't remember how long, but a few minutes. The rumbles came. And you could hear them coming, and it sounded just like a bunch of freight trucks or train or something else. And when it hit the house, the whole house just went to shaking. The windows fell in and rattled everything in the house, and we thought the thing was going to fall down. So we came out, and everybody around was out trying to see and decide what had gone wrong. Over on the corner were the cooperative dairy over there, and a bunch of dairy people over there milking their cows. The same expression came from everybody. What in the hell was that?
At that same time that they were saying this was insignificant and everything, they were sending out pamphlets of how to build these bomb shelters, and you had to have at least 3 feet of dirt over every opening and over the top of you to be protected from it. And yet, in the same breath, they were just pouring it on us.
I remember him coming home with the white powder on his clothes and his hat. And he had tried to wash it off from his hands and his face as soon as he could get back to the truck where he had water. But he warned us all to stay away from him because he knew.
Ones that haven't died or are suffering from it, just so near to me that it brought it home pretty close, pretty strongly to me.
I think it all came together, and my perspective of it and my commitment was established when I had the opportunity to take a visit down to the southern Utah area and personally visit with and talk to and listen to the people who have been evaluating and studying it and had their concerns out for years and years and years, and nobody had been listening to them.
We in Nevada have lived with the test site. It's sort of been in our backyard from the Las Vegas area, and people don't pay too much attention about the test. They understand it. They understand the necessity for them. They're not fearful of what might happen, some of the old scare stories that used to come out, and people have just sort of grown up with it.
And as the people at St. George took cover, it was natural that some of them had questions about atomic tests.
Well, I don't know. They've sure wondered a lot about what's going to happen to the younger generation that's coming along, whether a lot of them will have it or not. It's hard to tell.
I think that there's no question that on a statistical basis that there has been and will continue to be an increased instance of malignancies among the exposed populations. I don't think there's any doubt in southern Utah.
Right in our Declaration of Independence, it gave us that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and it's taken lives that were very dear to us, and it certainly has hampered our pursuit of happiness.
We had 4 young teenagers in 2 years that died with leukemia. Now for a town the size of Parowan, that's a traumatic thing. Whenever you lose a teenager, it's a traumatic thing. But when you have 4 in 2 years
of leukemia,
that is really a soul-searching thing, and it's just sad.
These were people. They were young people whose lives were ruined. They're shattered and finished.
The Atomic Energy Commission, I think, felt that this was a sacrifice that we had to make. There was a statement that someone made that the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, Strauss, had volunteered for all of us to be guinea pigs in this experiment.
Scientists have come forward time after time after time and said there is something wrong. And for the government to continue to refuse to recognize that that deserves airing, I think, is indifference.
Why would they silence these men like Mancuso that put out quite a big report on it, and they just cut him off short?
I think that they have been irresponsible to the public. I think they've been irresponsible to the scientific community. I don't think they have operated in the public interest, and I've expressed that in my that's represented the last few sentences of my last progress report.
Somehow or other, I don't feel like it's right. I don't feel like anything is right that they can just use people like that. That's what I said to why I wrote to the president. I was listening to his speech on human rights. So I wrote to him and I says, do we not have any human rights as just simply as human beings?
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this program to bring you important news. Word has just been received from the Atomic Energy Commission that due to a change in wind direction, the residue from this morning's atomic detonation is drifting in the direction of St. George. It is suggested that everyone remain indoors for 1 hour or until further notice. There is no danger. There is no danger. There is no danger. There is no danger. There is no danger.
There was a time, and it wasn't long ago, that government could do almost anything in the national interest. But attitudes are changing, and people are discovering that national security doesn't always protect public security. We've learned that government of the people has, on occasion, used the people. And if people have died as a result of atomic testing here in Nevada, and if the government knew of the danger and glossed it over in the national interest, we've not learned enough. It's time now to protect the public interest.
I've lost an uncle. I've lost a grandfather, both with leukemia.
Well, the first wife died with cancer, and then he died with cancer.
My grandmother, my grandfather, and my aunt all did.
There was Glenn Hollyoak. He died from cancer. His wife died from cancer, and there's Mr. Dalton, Rulon Dalton, and his wife Helen. Helen died before Rulon did, and then he married a Burton woman that her husband had died, and she got cancer, so there was all this group